up guys, Odi here. So I went ahead and pulled some questions, some interesting questions that you guys posted on my Instagram and Facebook accounts. Thank you so much for engaging and having so many cool questions. I went ahead and picked the ones that I think are mostly interesting for the majority and also some that are pretty thought-provoking. Let's go ahead and jump right into it. How do you identify mistakes/bad habits in your driving so that you can improve on them? It's not really difficult at this point in my career to fix a bad habit or a mistake. The most difficult part is catching that mistake or bad habit in time so that we actually have a practice lap or two left to strategize how to drive differently and how to avoid that mistake from happening. For example, I might be flowing through the track all weekend long, and the mistake that I'm kind of on the verge of making every single run, but I don't fall into that trap, comes out only when we make a change to the car. Say we throw more grip at it, and then we might be in a predicament where we don't have enough practice time to try a different driving strategy to avoid or fix the mistake. Usually the spotter finds those bad habits soon enough to where we can fix them before competition starts, because after every single run, I analyze the run with my spotter, sometimes just on the radio without getting out of the car, but we do a pretty thorough analysis of every single run. So a bad habit or mistake, they come out and it's pretty noticeable. This question's pretty interesting. How can you fix your car in 5 minutes? Do you practice that? I think it's pretty common knowledge that a lot of the pro teams do practice 5-minute drills. The difficult part is to pick and choose which 5-minute drills to practice, right? So before we even jump into 5-minute drills, we try to vet out mechanical problems that may occur that might cause us to have to fix the car in 5 minutes. We do this pre-season. We don't want to be in a predicament where we're fixing mechanical issues that could have been vetted out and not even cause the issue in the first place. We know that with certainty, collisions do happen in drifting, and we know for a fact on my chassis, because I'm very familiar with it, what failure points will occur during a collision. Some parts are actually sacrificial, meaning that they're designed to fail in a collision in order to prevent part failure that takes longer to fix. For example, on my S chassis, the rear toe arm made by Wisefab is collapsible. That is the first part that will usually fail if there's significant impact with the rear suspension. So we obviously practice replacing the rear toe arm, and we get it down to where we rush through it with time to spare in a 5-minute situation. All right, this is a suspension related question, so I love it. How do I feel is right and wrong as a driver in suspension, like rebound damping, etc.? What quick references can I apply and have good output in my drifting? Well, I think this is something that's overthought quite often. Honestly, as a driver in a drift car, I think you should put yourself in the shoes as a picky driver on a street car. Meaning, if there's too much body roll, if the car is bottoming out, if it's just too harsh over bumps, it's hard to stay on course. Treat it the same way as you would treat, a street car and you're a picky driver. A good competitive drift car shouldn't have compromises in suspension just to be fast or easy to drive or look aggressive and stylish. The winning car is usually the car that's easy to drive, that's very well balanced. All right, we got another suspension question, so thank you, I love those. What is the biggest thing new drivers should know about suspension and why it's important? I think the biggest thing that drivers should understand about suspension, like new drivers when it comes to drifting or any motorsport in fact, is the cause and effect of adjusting your shocks. You're gonna usually install shocks that are adjustable in a race car and or drift car, and you should know what those changes do to your car. You should be able to understand what happens when you adjust the two-way shock, when you adjust the rebound, you adjust the compression, if you adjust spring preload, even if you change spring rate slightly, you should know the cause and effect. That's the most important thing when it comes to understanding suspension. You have to exercise these things because sometimes you might hit a point where you adjust your suspension and it's not doing anything, and it's not your fault. Sometimes you might have just chosen a coilover option that doesn't have a wide range of adjustability, or the adjustments that are advertised don't actually do what they're advertised to do. Get to know your suspension and the cause and effect of all the changes. This is a simple and quick one. What is your favorite trackside tool? I'd say the impact gun. There's so many cool little tricky tools that I use, but the impact gun is by far what saves the most time for my crew guys. It saves me the most time when I'm out just driving by myself, practicing. Freaking love using the impact. All right, here's another suspension related question. And this one I feel like is always at the back of my mind and the back of a lot of drivers' mind and or car builders. With the sport of drifting always evolving and drivers hunting for more grip, there seems to be a lot of talk about anti-squat in the rear suspension for maximizing grip in a competition setting. Is the grip significantly less if the chassis squats under load instead of using anti-squat? That is a great question. I personally think there's not a huge significant change in grip if the car has some squat versus very little squat, because the static state of the suspension eventually loads the tire the same amount. Yes, there's some nuances. Anti-squat makes the car have load on the tire more instantly, so you get a sensation that your car has more instant bite. Also, anti-squat can eliminate some loss of grip because you're not letting the rear suspension cycle as much. It's not getting into an aggressive camber curve. You're using more of the contact patch of the tire usually. So excessive squat is obviously bad. Some anti-squat will help there. You don't have to add as much spring rate to keep the suspension from over-cycling or getting in a bad part of the stroke. You could simply add a little bit of anti-squat there. Also, there's an interesting theory that anti-squat keeps the center of gravity a little bit higher. And obviously, if the center of gravity is a little higher, you have a little bit leverage over the chassis, you can kind of load the tires a little bit more too. You're moving weight that's higher up, so it's got leverage over the tire. So I kind of like that theory as well. So yeah, the bottom line is, I think at static state, eventually the car will have the same amount of grip, but there are some nuances that will make a difference overall. So after answering this question, my videographer told me that, hey, this was actually specifically regarding an E46, but he didn't want me to know that it was specifically regarding an E46, which is great because the anti-squat thing, the theory applies to all chassis. On the E46, E36 is a trailing arm, so you can actually change the ride height of the car, and that really quickly, directly affects the anti-squat. On other chassis, you have to do a little bit of more work. You have to move the control arm pickup point. Overall, I think a lot of BMW guys really hyper-focus on this because they have so much quick adjustment on anti-squat there. Another tad bit that comes up with BMW specifically with anti-squat is that you get in a predicament where you grab the handbrake. If you have too much anti-squat and the car starts to move downward. And if you correct quickly, it upsets the chassis. So that's another negative downfall of too much anti-squat. It takes stability away from the car because now you're actually moving the chassis just by using a very common tool like the handbrake. And also as you get on throttle, it starts to really push back on the suspension. So if you're going over bumps and you're expecting your suspension to cycle, soak up the energy of the bumps, sometimes it's having a tougher time because you're actually not allowing the suspension to cycle to move down when you're on throttle. It's actually acting as an opposing force to it. That's kind of a trap that I see a lot of BMW guys fall into as well. So very fine balance. The BMW guys are always talking about this, so this is a very interesting question. Why supercharged? Do you have heat soak issues? Especially when you get a bunch of one more time battles with little to no cooldown. The supercharger is because I felt like it's the best power outer for my V8 engine with the least amount of space taken up in my engine bay. I personally love the way turbocharged V8s drive, but the abundant amount of piping that is present in the engine bay, it makes it hard to work on. It makes it hard to get to other parts of the motor. So I chose packaging that is least intrusive. I felt like the centrifugal vortex supercharger is not really in the way of too many other things in the engine bay. And we've been able to mitigate a lot of the heat soak issues with running a bigger Treadstone intercooler, also adding Durali intercooler fans, 2 of them on the intercooler. So we're doing okay mitigating the heat issues, and you just can't beat the extra power that you get from a supercharger and the less amount of packaging versus a turbocharger on a V8. This is an interesting question. I get this all the time. I actually started getting it before the season even started. Why switch back to the S14 for competition in FD? I actually switched to the car that I had Simon drive for 2 years in a row. I didn't switch back to my original S14. The reason I switched back to the S14 that Simon drove, I never drove that car. It was actually much newer than my S15. It's about 2 seasons old, whereas my S14 at that time was already about 4 seasons old. It just made sense to hop in a chassis that's fresher. And honestly, as I would drive both chassis back to back, I found that for some reason that S14 is just more ergonomically fitting for me. It's a little bit easier to drive, and I think that's because it has more front weight bias. And the ergonomics of it are a little bit more similar to OEM, whereas my S15, the seating position's pushed back quite a bit. It's got a floor mount pedal box. I kind of went bananas on the S15. You know, sometimes you just want to drive something that's a little bit more simple, so hence I jumped back in the S14. Ooh, I like this question. If you were forced to compete in a new chassis, what would you choose? I think about this all the time, right? To be honest, I think the chassis that stands out is a BRZ second gen chassis or a GR86. And that's because it's a lightweight chassis. It starts out being lightweight. Factory trim is like 27 to 2,800 pounds, which is similar to an S14, S15. So there's potential to build it the way you want. You're not starting out with a very heavy chassis. You're starting out with something light, and you could position the weight where you want it as you build it. Also, the wheelbase is quite favorable. It's a little bit longer than an S chassis. It's quite a bit shorter than the new BMWs, you know, like F30s, F22s. Yeah, it seems like that would probably be the chassis to go for. All right, here's a setup question. It's pretty cool. What setup changes do you make for bank tracks like Seattle versus flat tracks like Long Beach? Also, how much rear toe is too much in your experience? I think they're two very different questions, but let's unpack both of them. So on bank tracks, I usually stagger my camber in the rear. And it's not so much to get more grip out of the car. Yes, you have better contact patch, you make more grip. It's really in order to have enough tire left over after 2 complete runs. Some of the bank tracks are very long, and you load the car and load the tire a lot, so you go through the tire quite quickly. If you have the right amount of contact patch hitting the ground, the tire will last longer. You're using more of the tire. Usually more negative camber on the outside wheel, more positive camber on the inside wheel. It's kind of a go-to setup. For toe, I think 7/8 of an inch past that is diminishing returns on an S chassis. But this is very much not set in stone. Every driver has their own personal preference. Every car has a different amount of toe gain. So static toe with very little toe gain, even then 7/8 of an inch to me, that's like the max I'd ever run. How did Shadow, the shop cat, find you, and did you adopt him? So about a year ago, this very young kitten that was frightened ran into my shop. We're working, we thought the cat's gonna run right back out. He was obviously being chased by something, ran into my office, hid in a bookshelf, and stayed there the whole entire day. I realized this cat's probably gonna end up spending the night in my office. It looks dirty, it looks mangy. I put on some nitrile gloves, I grabbed the cat, picked off a handful of ticks. It was disgusting. And I felt like, okay, this cat's clean enough to spend the night here. And even then I thought it'll probably jam back out in the morning when I open the bay doors back up. 3 months go by, the cat will not step foot out of my shop. It decided to live here. I obviously gave it food, water, because, you know, it's a living thing. It hid in the shadows of the shop, in the tires and behind parts, so I named it Shadow. About a year down the road now, it is following me around like a puppy. It is the greatest, friendliest pet. I'm not a cat person, but this cat kind of changed my perspective on cats. Awesome animal, keeps the rodents away, hunts at night, comes back in the shop, sleeps majority of the day, and keeps me company while I work on the cars. So love this freaking cat. This is a really interesting question because I mean, it's something that gets me thinking, and I think about it actually quite often. What do you do to stay mentally sharp? You run a business, you're a dad, and you're still one of the hardest charging drivers in FD. Well, thank you very much. I think I just always give myself challenging goals in business and life in general, being a father. I think it's not searching how to stay mentally sharp. It's just always searching for those challenges and for those goals. Like, how do I make business better? How do I become a better father, a better husband, and juggle all these things? I think just the acts of doing that and continuously putting yourself out there and allowing yourself to take those challenges and take those risks, it keeps your mind just going. I'm like really much a person that learns from experience, so I feel like I just let myself experience things, even if I know there's a risk of failure, and that's how I learn and that's how I stay sharp. Now, I'm not saying I'm a master at it by any means. I still struggle with this all the time. And I know a lot of other drivers do, and a lot of CEOs and business owners struggle with it as well. So you just have to be open about it and be willing to make mistakes. And I have to put myself out there and experience it in order to actually get better at it. All right, this last question is kind of related to the one right before that. What motivates you to keep pushing to be better every year in FD in both your driving and overall program? How do you measure success in your drift season? I ask this all the time because I work so hard to continue to be in FD, to run a program. It takes so much of my energy, so much of my time. It's an opportunity cost to some of the other cool opportunities I have as well. So I do think about this quite often. I really enjoy the experience. I enjoy the the challenge, and it makes me, if purposefully makes me set goals and I have to achieve them to get through the season, right? So all these trials and tribulations really help me, I think, in other parts of my life. So I value those experiences, and therefore I keep pushing, because I know that it's pretty tough in life to find other things that will push you that hard. And obviously drifting is super fun, so that's icing on the cake. There's a second part of this question. How do you measure success in your drift season? That's a really good question. And it's evolving, it's changing, right? I used to be hyper-focused, like if my stats are good, that's successful. If I retain sponsors, that's good, I'm successful. Well, as I get older and I have experience checking off a lot of those boxes, I kind of start expanding and looking at the bigger and bigger picture. And ultimately, a successful FD season is a season where I'm happy throughout the season and happy postseason, and even happy before the season even starts, because my ability to manage time at my work at Feal Suspension, my ability to manage time with family, and then the ability to manage time while drifting to go and have fun outside of some of the competition events, like managing all that. If I pull it off, I'm having fun. And if I feel like I had fun and felt good about the season, that's a successful season for me. Thank you so much, guys, for engaging. I simply made a post on social media asking, hey, drop some questions and I'd love to answer them. And you guys came up with really thought-provoking questions. This is pushing me to kind of create better content for my channel, honestly. Like, you guys engaging and asking these questions. Now all the future videos that I'm creating, I want to make sure they're thought-provoking, just like these questions were. There's so many cool things that I do in motorsports, and I love sharing them with you. So I look forward to creating more content for you guys. See you next time.